Very welcome to today's webinar, and welcome to our second last webinar in this series. We will be finishing off the series next week. So we're delighted to be joined by Tony Daly today, who is coordinator for the development education organisation 8020, Educating and Acting for a Better World, and is project manager for the online platform developmenteducation.ie. So Tony is taking on the extremely important task today of analysing international development, international finance and global cash flows, and the entrenched global inequalities of our world. So it's a fairly significant task, very challenging task, but Tony is certainly the man for it. And I'm sure that by the end of this, you'll take something away, if not many nuggets of information and learning. So Tony is going to be discussing and critiquing how development work is financed and the lack of ambition and racism that lies behind the international poverty line of $1.90 a day, as set by the World Bank. So he's going to be looking at how these structures of inequality are supported and perpetuated by corporations and major global institutions and actors. So we're looking forward to hearing from Tony today. I'll pass over to you, Tony. And as usual, guys, we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A or chat box, and I can either unmute you to talk to Tony or read them out if you'd like to remain anonymous. Okay, thanks very much, guys. Enjoy the webinar. Over to you, Tony.
Great, thanks, Emma. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello from sunny Wexford in Ireland. I'm delighted to be taking part in the series and on invitation. It's wonderful to be part of one that is crucial in the current times that we're living through, and a sense of resilience and not just a sense, but in practice is actually quite important. So as Emma had said, you know, we've been working in this area for some time ourselves in 8020, and I'm delighted to bring some of our research, some of our findings, some of our thinking, and also some examples of how we begin to process the vast inequalities that are going on around us today. Sorry, my voice is very low, someone is saying, so I will speak up. I hope that's a bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run for about 20 minutes in total. And there's going to be time enough for some Q&As afterwards. If people would like to raise questions as we're going through, I'm quite happy to take them too. I'm very open to people engaging, so please feel free to do it. This is your time, so I'm very open to any suggestions as they come through. As you can see, the topic for today is on, as Emma suggested, it's on international development and being philosophical about it, but also being quite critical as well at the same time. And that has to do with a whole number of things that have come to light in recent years in terms of what we know. You know, as you can see from the cover cartoon there by a British cartoonist, his name is Brick. You know, the games to catch and keep up with the invention of new ways of squirreling wealth away is very much a game of hot pursuit that many in civil society have been involved in, and many in regulation work too. And I'm mentioning those up front because part of the exercise of thinking about the state of international development and what's going on in that context is that it's not happening in a vacuum. There's all these things going on around it. The transfer of wealth in different directions, and to who being a major question that needs to be answered as part of it. So as I say, I'm going to start off with looking at some of the equations around from poor to rich and language around legal or illicit. I'm going to look at what I'm calling Alston's last cry. Philip Alston, the outgoing special rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights, wrote a report earlier this year that was released in June, which in itself was a report card on progress on tackling poverty. And it is a very sobering report, and it's a very problematic one in terms of giving ourselves a slap on the back in terms of thinking about how much progress has been achieved. So let me just go back there for a second. So sorry, I could not hear you there. Sorry, you're saying the volume is quite low. Somebody's saying again. Is that still happening on my microphone? Is that correct?
I hear you okay now, Tony. I think generally it's okay. Yeah,
generally
maybe I
okay?
just want to increase. Yeah.
Okay, everybody increase your volume if I'm speaking a bit low, and then hopefully I don't blow your eardrums out. Lastly then, so the final third, we're going to look at some agendas for alternatives and introducing that commentary, knowing the report card that Philip Alston has left with regards to agendas for tackling extreme poverty. So that's to start us off. So in terms of introducing the key ideas, a key one for us is about looking at where the wealth is on the planet. The information tends to, and the data tends to arrive a number of years later when we're able to actually pull an analysis and look at what the picture looks like. You can see that the data that we have here is pulled on World Bank figures from 2015, and this is what the picture looks like in proportion to other countries. This was last updated in 2018. And I have to say that over the number of years we've been teaching and working on issues of inequality, this graph or this map of distribution hasn't changed a huge amount in proportion to other areas. But it's an important one to look at when we think about how much progress there has been, or has there been. But you can see that the distribution of things is important, particularly when we're talking about the overall impact. Well, aside from the broad distribution, I think the analysis and questioning about wealth inequalities between countries has become something that is quite central in recent years. Now, Oxfam's work in particular, working on Credit Suisse figures, asks questions about where is the wealth, but also who is wealthy. So it's not just a case of there's one country that's rich over another. And some of this is very much common sense, but being able to track the numbers down to the number of people that represent the same wealth as huge blocks of the planet. This figure here, as you can see, has been updated actually since this infographic was developed, about the richest 85 people on the planet had the same combined wealth as half of the people on the planet. So this was kind of using a bus analogy that you could get as much people onto one bus, a double-decker bus, that represent a large chunk of severe wealth inequality. These are important ways of trying to break down our sense of proportion with regards to extreme wealth. Sometimes it's very hard to get a sense of scale, and I think this helps to try and provide access points and routes for us in understanding these issues, because being able to work between what is telling the difference between a million and a billion and a trillion, and our sense of accessing that on a day-to-day basis can seem very very conceptual, very far removed, even hypothetical in terms of it's kind of its pure imagination. It's very hard to know, or even just immediately know the difference between a billion and a trillion. So this is being able to break down these figures is quite important, and we like to use graphics as ways of opening that up. Some recent work that we have been involved in as part of questioning who wealth is and why is it so, is about asking the question of putting figures of overseas aid going towards development assistance next to questions of extraction of outflows of resources. Being able to look at those two together was quite important for us. Being able to, as I say, it's almost like a game of cat and mouse where you're trying to track down the actual data and tracking down the points where this information is actually transparent and visible. We have a great sense of how much we give with regards to tackling poverty and charity in the world. And as you can see from the top line figure, its total aid flow there was 146 billion on average. That's in the last 3 years. It was 146 billion year on year. The question of outflows, and this is a figure that the World Bank prepares, is between World Bank and IMF figures, is 770 billion in terms of financial outflows. Asking what those outflows might look like, I think people have a stronger sense of it these days. We're in an era now where not knowing isn't really a huge option for us. Our ability to understand why things are the way they are is vastly greater now than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. The reasons why there's outflows have to do with things like sovereign wealth funds and where they're stored. It has to do with trade tariffs and trade barriers. It has to do with brain drain. It has to do with intellectual property rights. It also has to do with lots of those issues combined together. It also has to do with profit shifting and where tax ends up. Whether tax gets retained within a country or whether it actually gets moved out and stored somewhere else. I think we're all familiar with things like tax jurisdictions that operate outside of comfort zones for those that are, if you in the tax justice world, whether tax is distributed fairly or whether everything gets taxed or not. These are important questions to keep asking. The reality of the shakedown of all those things combined is that there are outflows from the poorest countries, on the planet collectively of 770 billion a year. So when we talk about for every dollar that goes in, $5 is extracted out and transferred out. And this picture is very important because our sense may be inflated and conflated when we think about how much we give. And I say that as somebody in a European country that contributes overseas aid in a very targeted way. This is the big picture commentary, really, rather than just on a single country alone, like Ireland. It's the collective impact and questioning that. Something that we find very important in this context, and I think it's worth raising, is about if we look at that wealth extraction of $1 in, $5 out, a question of how much is development potential investment is foregone is something that we need to account for. Tackling poverty costs quite a lot of money. And some of the costing of exercises, you can see from this particular table at the bottom that education for the lowest 59 income countries can be tackled for 259 billion annually. And health is equated there as 225 and 105 on basic social protection. This is to try and quantify what the 770 might look like if it was around for investment. And this again is important that these are investments foregone, but they are going somewhere. When we look at the wealth map, we see where they end up getting distributed. What the 770 billion, how is that put together? You can see from this particular graph, this was one from a report called Catch Them If You Can. And it was one that, as an education organization interested in human rights, we wanted to try and track some of the big trends to do with international finance. And this is a particular graph from that report that we pulled out. And these are based on figures that were tracked up until 2017. And whether data gets updated and whether the measurement of these kinds of flows get renewed annually is a question that we're left with now at the moment. We're not sure that they do. Anymore. The last up-to-date in the 2018 report from UNDESA, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, was that it was up to date only as far as 2017. So the question of net outflows being a negative figure is no longer being raised in the reports in a way that we can track. So again, things change in terms of what gets measured. This is just priming the space for Philip Alston, which is about to come up next. But what you're looking at is that red line of net outflows hasn't been drawn like that before. And we're trying to quantify it and hold it accountable to, certainly within the international agenda for development goals, currently the sustainable development goals, whether this kind of equation is sustainable is very important to ask. So in Philip Alston's report that I mentioned earlier, he reported as outgoing special rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights, and it is a furious and infuriating report from Philip Alston on anti-poverty work. He's deeply annoyed, hugely frustrated, and very much wants to take on the idea of the international poverty line as an acceptable measurement of a dignified existence. So if measuring a certain number of people on the planet as living above $1.90 a day, which is how it's currently tracked, and whether that is a sufficient measure of dignity, overcoming extreme poverty, is one that he demystifies directly in the report. It's a 19-page report. Take a look at it. You'll be surprised at how accessible the language is. And we like to look at these things to try and keep track of what's going on, but also curious as to whether it's going to be, you know, has the message changed from the last time? Is it something that is, you know, what is being tracked differently? But also, are they getting annoyed with, you know, a lack of change, or whether their, you know, accountability is sufficient with regards to challenging the state of poverty? This report is brilliant in terms of it being a sense of the poverty line being unreliable for a number of reasons. I have a couple of quotes that I wanted to at least give you access to now, to just hear some of the language Philip and his team have used, because it is at the end of a term on looking at extreme poverty issues. We looked at climate change, and, you know, and looked at austerity measures, and amazing reports, again around 19 pages long, very easy to look at. But as you can see there, Philip had said that the world is at an existential crossroads involving a pandemic, a deep economic recession, and devastating climate change, extreme inequality, and a moment challenging the prevalence of racism in many countries. For him, as you can see, those words, I put them in bold: long-standing neglect of extreme poverty and the systematic downplaying of the problem by governments, economists, and human rights advocates. For Philip Alston, and, you know, for observing the global delivery of tackling extreme poverty, it's insufficient based on evidence to date. You know, we already know from this year that we are unlikely to reach the zero hunger target by 2030. We know that from World Food Day just last week, and we are not on track to do that. Ending poverty is not possible based on these terms, and we are kidding ourselves if we think we are going to do it. These are part of the challenges that Philip has put directly to us. Quantifying how long it would take based on the current trajectory is something that, again, Philip has been actively involved in. You know, about how we frame things is important. So, you know, whether things are, you know, we're contributing to change, as he says, you know, the glass is 1/5 full rather than 4/5 empty. We're not accepting it's 4/5 empty. We're concentrating on just the 1/5 full. And I think the last point, as you can see on this particular slide, about tackling gender inequality at the current rate of economic growth, closing the gender gap could take up to 257 years. I mean, this is hugely dishonest if we think we're going to be doing this agenda actively and delivering on it in an honest way, when we know we can't do that based on the current standing of growth. I should say all of these ideas and this particular emphasis was introduced in advance of COVID-19 and the coronavirus, and this has been bubbling away for a number of frustrating years. Even you know, as a criticism of the Millennium Development Goals themselves leading into it, questions about sustainably reaching these kinds of clear universal targets was something that was challenged at the time, and we've been struggling with ever since. So again, there's lots of criticisms from Philip Alston asking really that we should reflect on these figures. To give you one of them, in the current context, I was just reading this up again today, is that 55% or 4 billion people on the planet had access to social protection or one form of social protection in 2016. And that's from the International Labour Organization. So in the current context about tackling poverty, things like social protection is actually really important to frame in that context. This last slide from Philip is about you know, the kinds of he says that poverty is a political choice and its elimination requires these 7 steps, and you can see them there: tackling inequality, embracing redistribution, promoting tax justice, looking at universal social protection. The role of government is vital, relying on the privatization of things like you know, a number of social services, whether it be education, whether it be health, whether it be access to utilities, is hugely problematic and unreliable and expensive and profiteering and so on. And Philip goes into the privatization agenda as well. So adapting to you know, a different way of measuring and measuring better is actually really important. Women are left out of the data when it looks to the poverty line. Minorities are left out or should I say, they're not included in a way that accounts for that. It's a single measure. So again, there's inequalities within that measurement or that agenda for measurement that we would do well to look at. So that's on Philip Alston. In terms of leading into my last couple of minutes, I suppose, there's many suggestions around what we can do. And it's important that Philip Alston's suggestions are, as I placed there, came out of the particular exercise he's been involved in, and it's worth us looking at those. Other agendas include business and human rights. So establishing that as part of government behavior and action, whether to do with their own procurement for services, and that includes the development of services themselves, and human rights audits and human rights checks, quality and budget checking. But it also includes our practice overseas. So when you think of supply chains, do companies from Ireland or based in Ireland, whether it be your Googles, your Facebooks, and so on, whether the supply chain is considered in a sense that engages with human rights. Is everybody's dignity fulfilled along the supply chain? Is an important question. So so principles matter, and Christian Aid have done some really great work around some key principles that can be utilized in questioning whether we are living up to social environmental responsibilities, certainly from a procurement side. There's also, as Philip Alston had said, that we need to seriously look at the Sustainable Development Goals and whether they actually are sustainable in their current form. If we expect growth to reach the rate that everybody will be included in terms of access to dignified livelihoods and a dignified existence, would it mean that we have to do extreme growth to the point where it's literally unsustainable to consume that rate on the planet? So there's all kinds of realities that have yet to be checked in there. But the degrowth agenda is an interesting one. Jason Hickel has done some fabulous work with regards to questioning environmental sustainability as well as human development, and looking at, can we develop without necessarily depleting the resources and the natural resources of our planet. So this idea of planetary boundaries and our planetary system is vital. Lastly, I have the last slide here is from Martin Turner, Irish Times cartoonist extraordinaire. And he, once again, it's about our sense of ourselves and our place in the world. So how do we see our own roles with regards to controlling things like supply chains, supporting strong initiatives? What can we do with that? So literally it's a question of what can I do, and not just outsourcing that responsibility to governments alone or to the procurement officer. So it's about everybody's participation in these agendas for change and not just handing them over to somebody else, because the starting platform for it is that it is hugely unequal, and it takes all of us engaging with that to change the balance, certainly to undermine it, and absolutely to provoke a different kind of trajectory than we currently are on. So that's a very quick introduction to a number of issues there to do with finance, poverty, international development, and could talk about it for a lot longer, but that's my presentation, at least on the issues that I wanted to bring up. And I hope that's okay for the moment. I'm very happy to take questions on any of that. I didn't get to say that the line that you saw with the graph in terms of outflows from developing countries is tracking legal outflows rather than combining legal and illicit and illegal. The question of what the difference is between illicit and illegal is a really interesting and important debate to have, because that means certain jurisdictions are, it's illicit, it's a little bit, we're a bit uncomfortable with it, but we will allow it. We think of companies in Ireland and some illicit activities with regards to paying tax and whether it is distributed fairly across the countries that those companies operate in. Again, questioning the language of what's legal and illegal and illicit is fascinating. I don't want to go down that route right now, but I'm just mentioning that because, again, catching them if you can is about what's legal here and what's legal there is not uniform everywhere, and trying to keep a sense of that and keeping track of it takes time and energy, but actually it's really important to keep that pressure on. So it's about maintaining that pressure. Anyway, that's my my introductory piece, and I'm very happy to take questions, comments, or any points of view. Sorry, over to you, Emma.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks so much for a great, incredibly insightful and really interesting presentation, Tony. We have a few questions here. So first one here is anonymous, so I'll read away. So you mentioned the SDGs. Do you think there is any way that the goals will be achieved on target? That's the question.
Okay, so will the SDGs?
So by 2030.
It depends. One of the challenges of during the formation of the SDGs, and this was something that people might remember, politicians like David Cameron were around, and if I'm not mistaken, David Cameron and others were looking for a much more limited list. They wanted something like 10 goals, because that's easier to sell to people back home. One of the challenges of the SDGs, it's a menu of options, and you can be very, very selective about the ones that you're achieving, and downplay, to use Alston's words, you can downplay others. Now, whether they're at the expense of others is an important question to ask, because a bit like the idea of human rights, they should and they are interdependent. They do affect each other. So while you are achieving some, you may be undermining others by not progressing them. So that's not a way of answering the question directly. It's a tall order to achieve the SDGs now, at this point in time, based on the current trajectory of climate action or inaction, based on the anti-poverty methods and practices as they exist today. It is unlikely to be achieved on a range of levels. Some of the targets, are pitched at levels and detail that yes, they can be achieved. Even to suggest, for example, that overseas aid, official development assistance, will that 0.7% be achieved across all the countries that have bought in and are active on that agenda? Ireland has been promising that in the early 70s, have committed to 0.7%, and we have yet to get there. So some of them is, I think, one of the big challenges for us is about, while ambition is important, and it's a hugely ambitious and diverse agenda, the need to be accountable and to achieve it is actually, it's an urgent matter rather than it being academic. And I think I think we should be bothered that we're off track on a whole load of them. So I do think we are going to miss a whole load of targets, just like we had done with the Millennium Development Goals. Also, something to watch is how the very terms that are used to track things may change, or how things are measured gets updated. So measuring poverty, the terms of that had changed, and China's development and from the 1990s was included over those 10 years in advance of the MDGs to then update the figures on how much has been achieved and overcome. But that undermines the reality that so many have remained at an extreme poverty level for so long. The figure of those that are experiencing extreme hunger is 690 million this year, the latest figure that came in the last few weeks. So sorry, that's me kind of answering a number of things there. I hope it helps to mention that. So if, to ask the question, would we reach, on $1.90 a day, how long would it take for everybody to be at least be measured by $1.90 a day? And the figure is, well, it was $1.25 when some of the original calculations were done, and it would take 100 years to get there. But a much more dignified measure that has been suggested by the UN Conference on Trade and Development, by David Woodward, who's a development economist and very active on this agenda, is $5 a day as a minimum. Should be a way of measuring it. And if you look at $500 a day, it would take, if I'm not mistaken, 207 years to reach that, if we were to do it based on the current rate with which we're tackling poverty. So does 207 years sound like we're anywhere close? A bit like closing the gender gap, and those are questions we need to actually ask out loud, and somebody needs to answer that. It isn't just good enough to go and look at how much plastic we're going to recycle. That's not the answer, let alone where we're going to ship it. That's a different question that we may be avoiding. So the reduce, reuse and recycle point. We're good with, we're okay with recycling. We're okay with reusing, not great. The reducing part is something that we actually neglect quite a lot, or ignore, bypass and go straight to recycling sometimes. So anyway, sorry, I'm going down a particular road there. Do you have any other questions or comments? Or?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thanks so much, Tony. Yeah. No, thank you very much for the question as well, because it's hugely important and so pertinent to look at kind of how is the agenda being shaped, as Tony said, was it honest from the outset? Also as well, even that the fact that it's not obligatory for all states to kind of act on, and that can be voluntarily adopted, all these sort of, wiggle roots and kind of out of things. And, kind of, although it was in theory agreed by all UN member states, there were very powerful interests that, things were taken out at the end, and even targets that are incredibly vague, that actually even, I mean, what does it mean to achieve then certain kind of subsections when, there's a lack of data if you actually go to SDG tracker and look through it, and, and really being able to be accountable. It's kind of, it's deliberately sort of made so abstract and vague to enable us to move around these uncomfortable issues. So it's a very important question. So thank you to whoever put that. Okay, we have one here from Nagara Jan, apologies, I couldn't read it in the front. Is poverty imposed or self-obtained, is the question. So perhaps, Nagara Jan, I might unmute you there just so you can interact with Tony yourself, and if you'd like to elaborate more. So 1 second, I will do that there now. Okay, so you should be able to talk there now.
Hello.
Hi, Nagajan. Yeah, we hear you okay. Yeah. If you want to speak there with Tony. Okay, the connection maybe is not so great.
India, Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
Generally, poverty seems to be, in some countries it is imposed, and in some countries it is self-obtained, because some people may not have the willingness to work and earn.
Okay.
There may be some policies of the government that may induce only few persons to be more affluent and make other citizens near the poverty line. What do you think about it? Whether it is imposed or self-obtained?
So sorry, Nagarajan, I didn't get the full question about. I think the line was a little bit fuzzy.
The line is a little bit fuzzy.
So, but if Emma, if I don't, feel free to type the text in, Nagarajan, if I didn't hear you fully, or you'd like to restate it, that's no problem. Your question relates to, is poverty imposed or self-obtained? Self-obtained, it's. I didn't fully understand the self-obtained part of it, but certainly the imposition point. Sorry, yeah.
Self-obtained. I mean, some people may not have the willingness to work, willingness to earn, willingness to get benefited.
Okay, yeah. So Nagarjan, your question is around if people aren't willing to work.
I think there's.
Some countries spoil the people by giving freebies. Everything will be given free. At the same time, the people won't have the willingness to work. They want everything at the doorstep that should be given by the government.
Well, parts. I would say, I would say that, the potential to live in poverty should not be the threshold that people should want to take part in society or have to work. I don't believe that that there's. I don't subscribe to the school of thought, and I have engaged with this in a number of contexts, particularly in the UK. Whether poverty is deserved or undeserved is something that is your own fault, and therefore it's quite punitive to live in that existence as a result of your own circumstances. I think it's quite it can be quite inhumane to view it that way, and I think it's quite troublesome to develop policies around that way of thinking. To believe that it isn't developed that way, I don't see that happening. I know it is in certain contexts, where the phrase is used, povertyism, where you blame someone for the situation that they're in. Part of the difficulty is that the system is rigged and is so unequal, and is so treating those who've captured the resources of the state, or in the establishment classes in many countries, that that things like, for example, things like to give you, the landed class. I would even say that, to use a word like class, having lived in the UK for some time, class is something that I am much more intimately aware of and engage with. But we have things like the payments to slave owners to buy out slaves, and how those nest eggs were used, and how they lived on in other institutions and were used for families and for businesses to accumulate wealth historically, and how that has grown and mushroomed to a point where, to believe that we all just need to roll up our sleeves and work hard and in some way be just like them is not true. I think that there's an underlying hypocrisy to the state of the world, that if we believe it is just a case of rolling up your sleeves, when the pressure, the crushing pressure of that landed wealth that is inherited, passed on, shared and retained and tucked away, goes as well for transnational corporations. When you look at some of it too, I'm not going to mention the East India Company and look at their history. Jason Hickel has done some fantastic work on that more recently, asking the question about, well, where has that gone? And we have even people in Ireland whose names are on books, who are part of trades in slaves, to do with their, have been bought out by the British state, and that finance was passed on through families. So there is a problem of inequality that gets passed on and protected in the Cayman Islands as much as it does elsewhere. Just to pick on the Cayman Islands for a second. So now the question is poverty imposed or self-obtained? In that kind of context, poverty kind of is imposed and is kind of inherited and is passed on. But part of the agendas like the SDGs is about trying to call that out. But I don't believe we can't just maintain the fiction that everything is fine and everything is going to be fine if we don't provoke and shift some of those historical realities that get inherited and passed on. There's a redistribution question that comes up that we have to face off, particularly when 1% of the planet have access to how much of the wealth. This information is not new, and we should be hugely uncomfortable with that. I wrote a figure down earlier as well, Nagarechan, that asking the amount of growth from from the year 2000 to 2009, 5% of GDP growth globally went to the poorest. So in terms of who gets the share of growth, even over a period of time, the realities are not just a case of somebody isn't working. So I think that's the first point. The second is access to common goods. Like the commons is a word, I would even say public goods that everybody should have access to, like health, education, social protections, and also access and social protections as well as, employment rights. And that includes having access to trade unions, being able to not be overworked for health and safety in the workplace and so on. These things collectively are about a better existence for everyone. And I don't think it's fair that we can trade those off just to get a cheap price on something. And, again, is it self-imposed or self-obtained? I'm thinking of that question when I look at that information. And I think defending public goods is actually more important than ever when we know that the the fire sale of the environment, of nature, and of cheap labor means that there is a cost to bear, and the cost is paid by lots of people directly. You know, whether they're left out of the data or left out of anecdotal evidence, there's a huge cost to be paid. So sorry, that's me kind of, I don't know if I'm on a rant or kind of answering the question. I hope that's,
I think so.
Yeah, if there's a follow-on, go for it, or happy to take anything else.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you very much for the question.
Okay, so somebody wanted Philip Alston's report.
Yes, from Louise. So I'm not sure if you have it to hand. There, Tony, if you can share in the chat. Yeah.
In the next few seconds. There is, where is it? I have it right here. Yes, no problem. I've got the link right now. So I'm sending the link to a quick summary that we did to all, how do I do this? So I'm doing all panelists and attendees. So this is the very quick summary that we developed, basically a one-pager if you're interested in some of the key headlines. And I'm also sending you the link to the actual report, which is well worth reading. And there's the actual report as well. So you've got the two. And they're actually really important to check out. So yeah, any other questions, comments, or observations are welcome. I know we're probably reaching time as well, but happy to hear it.
That's okay.
Engage. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks a million for that. And I will share the link as well with all the attendees who've signed up for today, because I know a few have had to shoot off. I suppose just one from myself, and we don't have any other at the moment from the attendees before we finish. A very big one to Endel. How do you think we as citizens can best go about challenging the dogma of growth when it's so predominant and sort of overwhelmingly accepted as that this is the method for countries to lift people out of poverty? So for countries throughout Africa and Asia, that the route they need to go is following growth. We know it's not sustainable but from a citizen level. Obviously it's structural change required, but how do you think that citizens can engage with that? Because that's obviously a really important piece of kind of development and education, how we can participate in the process.
Thanks for the question, Emma. Nice easy one there. What I would say what I would say is that there's a particular phrasing that's used when it comes to coming to public judgment on an issue, and raising pressure means having to do certain things to try and raise awareness, to get buy-in, to build up critical support. And the word that's used is choice work. So my response to you is that we need to be active. Everybody should be active in their own spaces, with their families, their neighbors, their professional context. That if they volunteer or if they do something different in their networks, to engage in choices on these agendas directly. When it comes to procuring goods for your firm, there is a choice to be made about whether you have social and environmental responsibilities, and that's ISO standard built in or not. The conflict minerals directive across the EU is going live from January this year. So a question I would have is, are people prepared for that? Or are we going to get cheap electronics at the expense of extraction from various countries to do with precious minerals, knowing full well what the cost is on the environment and the people involved in that? We could say the same about state utilities and access to coal. So don't just, but occupy the spaces of pressure that you have direct access to. I mean, this is why the very last slide I had up was about our sense of ourselves and our place and our duty in the world, because it is about thresholds of change and enough people coming together. I believe the figure is in and around 12%. That is what it takes of a given population group to tip it over to be enough to bring about active policy change. So, and I'm not just thinking about the high levels 12%. Of going to the UN or going to, the International Fora. Yes, if you want to do that, and that's where you can, and you want to do that, fine. Sometimes it's good to practice that and give it a shot, because I think these agendas belong to everyone, not just those with 3 PhDs in economics that read World Bank reports, but it actually has to do with, we should all be able to read Philip Alston's report. So I'm delighted to be able to share it, and I'm delighted someone asked to see it. But
absolutely.
So it is about occupying lots of these spaces and being active in them. That's kind of what I would say. So so what I was going to say there was, it isn't just about the UN level, it is about local level and regional level. So, you know, we're engaged in conversations at the moment to do with public procurement and county councils. So what's going on? You know, in terms of supply chains, is it supporting the local economy, infrastructure? Fine. But what about fair trade and unfair trade? You know, what's unfairly traded, to use that phrasing? You know, is there anything illicit in terms of the flow or the transactions? You know, is it fair? And so on. So these are questions that need to be asked. And so holding our own institutions accountable is important. I would also say,
Absolutely.
I would also say defend institutions because they're yours. Occupy them. I say that for county councils, local government, regional governments.
Yeah, engaging with them. Absolutely.
Fine. But the institution itself may be, we know, for example, in Trinity College Dublin, that the board of directors took a vote on the back of students lobbying to get the college to divest their funds out of fossil fuel investments. They succeeded, and this is a bunch of rabble-rousing, smelly, you know, too much time on their hands students in college. Now, what they did was they occupied the institution to say, make it a more just institution. If we're going, you know, what kind of society do we want, and how are we going to get there is actually really important. So, so be active on it. Don't just ignore it or say it's all fake news or it's all fake or it's all just vested interests. If we leave it to that, well, then we can't be surprised by the outcome if you just leave it to others to do that. So
absolutely, putting the pressure.
Occupy all these things and get involved because it takes all of us. And otherwise, you know, you can't be surprised by some of the results. That's kind of a very quick way of responding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just maybe as one
as well, you know, and I say institutions at lots of different levels, and we have to appreciate that change occurs at all those levels. It isn't just a piece of paper from government that actually is the win. The success actually is about a whole community, you know, and the question is about building more just, fair, you know, equal communities, you know, piece by piece, step by step, shop by shop.
Through our individual actions.
Sticker by sticker on each one of those shops to get us there, and getting them to put the pressure in their chains and their networks and so on. That's kind of a long way around it, and I hope that's helpful.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, thank you, Tony.
Show solidarity, of course, support others in that work.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you, Tony. There was just one, there was a hand raised by Angelique there. So maybe just before we finish off, Angelique, if you wanted to make a comment, I'll just allow you to talk there.
That's great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Angelique. Yep.
That's great. I just wanted to comment and just say and reiterate what was said there, that we all have an individual responsibility, social responsibility, as we kind of buy things in our own communities. And because what most people don't understand or know about is what China is doing in Africa, buying governments by giving them money to grow their economies, but that comes at a price, and that price I've seen myself in South Africa because the government is bankrupt. They give them money to help like for instance, Eskom, which is the only provider of electricity in South Africa. So they help them out of money difficulties, but at a price. And so they are exporting a lot to China to build all of these cheap products. So yeah, we have the buying power. So if individuals now, especially with Christmas coming and around the corner, put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Too crude or anything, but yeah, that's all I was saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A really important point, Angelique. And I think that's it. It's gone from, you know, from individual all the way up to structural level. But as Tony said, you know, if individual and, you know, the knock-on snowball effect, you know, you get if you get invigorated and get involved yourself and you bring others with you, and you show solidarity with others, you know, it is just on its small cohorts that starts shifting the balance. So, and at the end of the day, as you say, Angelique, exactly, I mean, we are the consumers, so it's hugely important that we're informed and we're aware, and we make the, you know, we can control it. Actually, I think there can be a real sense like, oh, how can we, you know, kind of confront Amazon as a multi-billion dollar company, but actually if everyone tomorrow stopped buying from them, I mean, they would go bankrupt, you know. So, and I, you know, but it's like, I know that's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's piece by piece, you know. And I think it's taking it in kind of ways for you that you can latch onto, whatever it might be in your own, you know, in your own life, whatever you have capacity to do, you know, start there, start small, and kind of build from there. And yeah, take hope from the fact that it will make a difference. And yeah, and you can encourage and inspire others. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Angelique.
Thanks.
Emma, that from our perspective, something I wanted to mention today was that the Transnational Institute, I'm not sure if people are familiar with the TNI, but they have done some fabulous work on the topic of remunicipalization, which in itself is about you know, the reversing of the privatization of public goods and public utilities. And what they've done is they've created an international map that you can check out and look at all the different spots and activities and ideas and examples where things have been taken back into regional control, to city control, to, you know, of various different things, you know, water supply, electricity. And it's the balance of countries is interesting because you've got, you know, the UK, Germany, France, you've got loads in Central America as well. You've got some in, you know, Southern Africa. There's plenty of examples. And it's the TNI, I think they call it, I can't remember the name of the project, but it is on remunicipalization. And I think it's called Taking Back the Public, I think is the name of the actual name of the project. And it's about this idea of alternatives against the rolling privatization. I say that knowing full well that one of the potential silver bullets for delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals is getting from billions to trillions in private money. The difficulty is, one of the difficulties, I have many, but one of the difficulties is that public-private partnerships means that public money is used to back private ventures. We have them in Ireland, we have them across Europe, and we have them on fossil fuel projects. So we know that the transition is actually about extraction of wealth to private outfits to deliver on some of these ideals, and it's being backed by public monies. So there's lots of challenges within it. But this idea of, you know, asking what's important, what kind of societies do we want, and defending the public space and the public realm and public goods is actually really important. So, and we're not alone. Knowing that there's alternatives, even just business as usual has to be, you know, can and is being challenged, and knowing that it is very important. We're not starting with the conversation, you know, we need to change business as usual. Business as unusual is occurring in lots of different spaces and places, and it's well worth checking it out. The TNI have that brilliant report and a great interactive map to give you more info, to get inspired, to learn from it, you know, bring those ideas into your own context. And I know in South Africa, that is particularly difficult in a very particular way, Angelique, you know, and the many public, the public service delivery protests that go on every year, you know, is not just appalling, but I don't know why that doesn't make the news more now. Here, we should hear about that more often. And the difficulty is, you know, newsworthiness is almost like we become numb to that idea. So we have to do something about that. I'm very uncomfortable with it. And actually, it's important to be uncomfortable, because otherwise the other side of that is not particularly good or dignified or fair, or, you know, it's very unsavory. So yeah, so look, if there's any other comments, questions, feel free to go for it. I think we've covered quite a bit there, but I'm happy to take any of those ideas further. I know we're kind of tipping on lots of different things there, but knowing full well that that it isn't just about national politics, but the kind of you know, between countries work and international solidarity in this kind of conversation, and in you know, connecting up between projects is actually really important. It's not just a case of islands now and we're all just, you know, looking for national outcomes on it. We know that the issues, as Philip listed, are beyond national boundaries. So solutions have to be much more ambitious to actually respond to that.
Exactly.
You know, an
COVID brain
example,
that so forth.
there's a what do you call it? There's a Robin Hood tax on financial transactions, and they've renewed the campaign for that. I'm calling it the Robin Hood tax plus climate. So they
Oh,
want
right.
the polluters to have to pay a tax, a
Mm.
financial transaction tax, because even this great agenda for transformation at the same time also has huge investment in the fossil fuel trade. The IMF
Mm.
publishes the global figure of fossil fuel subsidies every few years. And the question we need to ask is, what is that figure compared with investment in renewable energy?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, is the transition away from this into that, or actually is it just about, you know, we'll stay here,
Sideways kind of.
but you can have investment, but we're staying here. These are
Yeah.
important questions about the structure that we can ask as well. Sorry,
Absolutely.
I talked a bit there. Go for it.
No, not at all, not at all. And it's very interesting doing absolutely when you say about kind of different countries examples. I was reading recently about the example of direct democracy in Rojava and Northeast Syria as well, and how it's enabled them to have a more efficient response to COVID. So, you know, there's really interesting examples of communities and locations all around the world that we can look to. Okay, maybe just one final one from Nagarjan. Again, just saying the COVID effect on employment opportunities in Ireland and the world. If this is leading to a reduction in purchasing power. If you think, Tony, that is it, that the reduction in employment is leading to a reduction in purchasing power. And maybe if we make this our final question, perhaps for the for the webinar, and then to move on.
There's an interesting dilemma about, you know, I guess we can't purchase as many international flights as we, you know, may have been able to last year, for those that, you know, are engaged in that particular kind of purchase. I think that that we are now challenged to not have access to purchasing anything and everything on tap, or that we can't just you know, have the extreme luxury of purchasing anything, is an important challenge to just hear out in the open. I think that I do agree that, you know, there is a reduction in our purchasing power when we know, certainly from the anti-poverty tracking work, that there's a minimum about 70 million people are now going to be pushed into a situation of extreme poverty below that $1.90 line. As indignified as $1.90 is as a marker, there's actually a much huger figure of people existing in and around that, up to $3. But yes, there are more. They're saying the World Food Programme have commented on it, and others, that that it's between 70 million and 130 million people are actually going to be pushed into extreme poverty as a result of COVID-19. So to answer the question, using a figure like that, absolutely, it's unavoidable. No, we won't. At the moment, you know, there's different things that can be purchased versus others. We're having to close down certain trades. Other things are slowing down. We know that there's going to be a reshaping, almost like during wartime, where certain industries are not needed and not necessary. You know, what's a necessary service is becoming a question that we have to constantly ask and face up to. And, you know, tourism as an industry, for example, is a very difficult one to sustain in this context. So people involved in that particular trade craft, yes, there is a reduction. So there's questions about, well, what should be the kinds of trades that we do maintain in the current context? Could there be a different kind of retrofitting of industries to align differently with the SDGs? You know, I'm not going to say as part of degrowth, but they're, you know, that more in a more sustainable manner in the current context is something that is, the answer didn't come with waiting around. And we're 6 months, 7 months in, and people were hoping maybe if we can push enough subsidies and give people tax breaks and maybe give them vouchers, or maybe give them, you know, unemployment benefit and so on, we might get them to a certain point. But the answer is that that may not be sustainable, knowing full well that the majority of people on the planet, I think I said 4 billion, do not have access to more than one social protection, as the International Labour Organization measured, and that was in 2016, let alone vast numbers of people who've been rendered unemployed now. So yes, there is a reduction in purchasing power. Is kind of like, I guess that's my short answer on it. You know, we've a lot.
It's a moment of change.
It's a moment of change, and it's, you know, these agendas require transformation of ourselves as well as the very systems that we're intertwined with. And it's not easy work, and it's not comfortable work either. But I do have a huge reservation and fear for, you know, more people being left out of a system and of a project, and to call the development project as it is, knowing full well that you know, a lot of work has been done, but under COVID-19, at least 3 years of anti-poverty work and international development work is being erased overnight. It's going to set the agenda back by minimum of 3 years, and that's just on the ODA and the overseas aid work, as opposed to all kinds of other investments. That's just one distinct particular branch. I haven't even talked about the transnational profit shifting and what happens in that context in terms of just protecting the core and protecting their profits, and what will be done in order to protect that. So kind of answered some of that, I hope.
No, I think absolutely so, Tony. Yeah, thank you. Well, look, thank you very much to everyone who has stayed with us towards the end of this session. We're delighted to have had you with us, and huge thanks to Tony for taking the time to be with us today. Tony's a very busy man, personally and professionally, in the moment with things going on, so we're really grateful to him for his time and to acknowledge that. And yeah, thank you to everyone who joined today. We hope you enjoyed it. You hope you've taken a lot from it. Obviously, feel free to get in touch with me afterwards if you would like to perhaps be put in contact with Tony. I will also share. Oh, sorry, Angelique. I think you'll be able to remute. That's okay. Don't worry. No problem. These things happen in webinars. Don't worry. Don't worry at all. That's okay. No, this is life working from home, or indeed perhaps the opposite if you have your cats there. But no, so thank you very much, guys. And if you can join us next week, we'll look forward to having you with us. We have a lady, Olivia Holbrook, joining us next week, who will be discussing community participatory health. She's a former winner of our Where There Is No Engineer design competition, which she won with her Tide menstrual toolkit design in 2018, which is a reusable and universal menstrual solution for displaced women, but in fact can be for all women. So Olivia will be joining us next week for the last episode of our series. So if you can make it, we'll be delighted to have you with us again. But thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. And thanks to Tony. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emma.
Cheers, guys.